Now, before we dive into the proper first impressions, I wanted to take this time to apologize to all the people who were expecting this video way back when. I'm not known for doing too many first impressions, so I guess I kind of fell victim to my own golden rule when it came to talking about video games. And that's how much time you should spend in a game before you get on camera and preach it to the choir. I'm sure you guys know this, but depending on which genre of video games you play, the amount of time you're going to spend into it before you can give a person a proper representation of the game is going to vary. Sometimes exponentially. The amount of time you would spend in something like a competitive online first-person shooter may be less than, say, a open-world RPG such as The Witcher. And with RPGs like Tales of Zestiria, Japanese RPGs, they are no exception to that rule. Originally, I was going to do my first impressions on Zestiria when I hit the 15-hour mark in the game, but something was telling me that I was way too early in the game to give a proper and accurate representation of what I truly feel. And I was right to wait past the 15-hour mark, because I have some updated impressions for you guys. Well, in this case, general impressions. But how I feel about the game has kind of changed. Anyway, let's dive straight into it with explaining what Tales of Zestiria is. Like I mentioned in the intro of the video, Tales of Zestiria is the latest installment in the long-running Tales of RPG series. And what was really interesting about this title in particular is that this was an anniversary game. This was developed with the 20th anniversary of the Tales series in mind. The series has been running since 1995, and when this released in 2015, that marked the 20th anniversary. When developing this game, the staff had a lot in mind of what they wanted to do to this game. They wanted to differ pretty drastically from where the recent entries were going, while at the same time returning to the roots of what made Tales great. So you had a lot of things going into this game that should be awesome, right? I mean, you have a bunch of the original staff working on this. Of course, Hideo Baba is back on production. You have two legendary composers for the Tales series collaborating. So this game should be incredible, right? Tales of Zestiria, in my opinion, is one of the most polarizing games in the franchise. And when I mean polarizing, I mean even more polarizing than what the last polarizing game was, and that's Dawn of the New World. Well, I guess no one really likes that, but I kind of do. I like the battle system in that one more than Symphonia, but that's a preference thing. So the best way that I can get into this game is talking about what they were trying to do with it. This game feels more like an older entry in the Tales series than the newer ones. Not to say that games like Vesperia or Grace's F or the two Xillia titles were so modern and so different than past games, but they kind of lacked the fantasy element and the lore that surrounded it. Some of the things you would see in the really old Tales games. And that's what I liked seeing this one. I liked seeing all these crazy castles. I loved seeing dragons show up. There were a lot of good things in Zestiria that really made it feel like a classic Tales title. What is the most important thing when it comes to the Tales games for you guys? What is the one defining factor that can make or break your experience with the game? Now, a lot of people say gameplay. A lot of people say story. But me personally, when it comes to the Tales franchise in particular, the characters are what make or break the game for me. And you guys are probably asking yourselves, why does that matter? These are just characters. You're playing a video game for its gameplay. While you guys are right, I'm not refuting that claim. Characters are just as important, especially with the series, which has built up such a beautiful, beautiful roster of memorable characters. Let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, these are RPGs, Japanese RPGs, which have an average playtime of 40 to 60 hours. So if you're going to be with these characters for that amount of time, they better be freaking likable. And not just likable, they better be memorable. And that's where Tales of Zestiria kind of fails on all accounts. Now, I'm not saying that the characters are bad in any way, because they're not. You've got a pretty decent lineup. You have Saray, who is your main character. That is who you control. You have his childhood friend Mikleo. You have Rose, the member of the Sparrow Feathers Merchant Guild. Lila, who is a seraph. Edna, who is a seraph. And Dezel, who's a seraph. Those are your main cast of characters who you're going to be playing with from the majority of the game. Well, from where I am anyway. Like I said, I'm 30 plus hours in, so things may change and we might see more characters show up. I have a good feeling one more person is going to join the roster, because knowing Tales games is usually 6 to 7 to 8 characters. But yeah, these characters, while they're serviceable, they don't really have any flaws to them whatsoever. They're just kind of boring. There's nothing really interesting that separates them from the traditional tropes and cliches that you would see in Japanese RPGs. I mean, maybe this is because I'm 30 plus hours in and not much crazy stuff has happened in the story, but I like to think that I'm halfway through. And if I'm halfway through the game and I'm not really connecting with these characters, that's kind of disappointing. Especially considering we had such strong characters in the previous game, Tales of Zestiria. These were characters that I got so attached to that I did every single side mission because I wanted to see what made these characters who they are, why they do the things they do, and what makes the bond that these guys have so important and so precious. With the characters in this game, it just feels like they were all jumbled together because they have really interesting character designs, I guess. I'm just not feeling the same level of chemistry between Sorey and his squad as I did with someone like Jude and his, as I did with someone like Yuri and his. It's kind of depressing. Again, not to say that any of the characters are particularly bad, because they're not. Of course, since this is a Tales game, it's got its humor in there, and all the characters, when they do have the funny skits, things do tend to mesh pretty decently. But other than that, it just feels like, okay, I could have done without you guys, and you could have been generic NPCs, and I wouldn't have known the difference outside of your really colorful character designs. One character in particular I do want to draw some attention to because it's caused a lot of controversy in recent months, well, in this case, a year since the game has been out. And that character is Alicia. Now, if you've been following the game at all, you may have heard of the controversy that happened in Japan. Basically, without giving away any spoilers, Alicia is a character who shows up very early in the game. She's actually one of the first people you bring into your party. And Alicia starts off as a pretty decent character. I like where her progression was going. She seemed pretty cool. She just up and vanishes. Yeah, that's it. Not even 25% into the game, and she leaves. And of course, people are going to say it's story related and she's going to do her thing and what she wanted to do. But let me put this in perspective for you guys. This is a character who was featured on the main box art. So that implies, hey, she's going to play a big role in the game. And she isn't. She's there, she does her thing, and then she disappears out of nowhere. And it's almost sudden. And I'm just wondering to myself, whoa, what is happening? Now, it would have been one thing if she was just a character and they didn't know what to do with her. So they said, hey, let's just write her out of the story. But it gets worse than that because she actually is still in the story. It's just that her continuation is part of DLC. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Tales of has Day 1 DLC. And I'm not talking about character costumes or weapon enhancements. I'm talking about a legit story section that was cut off and put up the day the game came out. And you would think with all this controversy that happened, they would fix this for the Western release and actually put the data on the disc or just unlock it because it probably was on the disc in the first place. But they didn't. They did the same thing they did in Japan, where you actually had to go to Namco Bandai's website, create an account, download the code from there, and then input it onto your console if you wanted to get the character. So you had to do all that work just to get this character in a separate story. I don't know about y'all, but that is freaking ridiculous. It should have never been like this in the first place. The Tales of series does not need these horrible business practices because the series sells pretty decently enough. It's a niche game, so of course the fans are going to buy it. You didn't need to do that to Alicia, especially considering that she was an interesting character. But moving away from the characters, let's talk about the story of the game. Again, like the characters, it's not bad per se. But one thing I think a lot of people who have played the Tales games, and I guess been kind of lukewarm to them, and I think this is definitely true if you're looking up the critical reviews of the Tales games from a lot of the Western journalists. The story is definitely something that a lot of people tend to give flack. And to be honest, as big of a Tales fan as I am, I can definitely see where these people have problems with it. The stories aren't necessarily bad, but they are filled with standard anime cliches and tropes, and a lot of the characters just didn't seem to get enough development. Of course, that changed with recent entries. Zestiria 2, for example, is beautiful with its character development. But for the most part, a lot of the other games in the series, sure, the stories are great, but they always could be something more. Or maybe they're just not trying to be. Who knows? What was Zestiria? It's just boring to say the least. I mean, I understand what's going on, but nothing is really giving me motivation to continue in this story. It doesn't seem interesting whatsoever. Even the characters don't seem intrigued in it, as strange as that sounds. Like I said, it's not bad per se, but it's just not that great. Now, moving into something that is pretty good, I'm going to, I guess, go from a good to a bad to a good to a bad. Let's talk about the presentation of the game. Let's talk about the voice acting, the writing, all of that mumbo jumbo. I've got to say, as a person who's been playing the Tales games for, oh man, more than 10 years at this point, the voice acting in the recent entries has never been as strong as it is now. And I seriously mean that with a passion. The voice acting, the writing, everything's gotten so much better. And one of the cool things about Zestiria for the first time in the series is that it actually comes with the original Japanese voice track. So you have 2 audio options to play the game in. This has been something a lot of the quote hardcore Tales fans have been complaining about for the longest. And let's be honest, when it came to a lot of Japanese games brought over to the West back in the day, the voice acting was horrendous and there was definitely cause for concern. So now that we have this additional track, you can choose whether or not you want to listen to it in the dub or if you want to just use the subtitles. I personally don't make a big deal out of voice acting so long as it isn't Resident Evil or House of the Dead tier. And one thing I do love about these games is that the production, as far as the English side is concerned, has gotten so much better. And that's something I can definitely applaud them on with this game. Now that we've gotten the story, the characters, voice acting, all of that good stuff out of the way, let's talk about the main meat and potatoes, why a lot of people play video games. And that is, of course, the gameplay. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this is an evolution of the linear motion battle system. It's the battle system that has been present in the past few Tales titles, and like the past few Tales titles, it is different in its own way. I know a lot of people, when they see an annual franchise like Tales, they like to think to themselves, oh, every game in the series must play the same. That couldn't be further from the truth. If you're playing something like Zestiria, and then comparing that to Tales of Symphonia, radically different. Seems like it was made by 2 different developers. If you're playing something like Vesperia and then comparing that to something like Tales of Xillia 2, there's just no competition. Especially Xillia 2, which in my opinion has the best battle system in the entire franchise. I mean, the amount of crazy combos you were able to pull off with Ludger, going from sword style to gun style to freaking hammer style, it was just phenomenal. And Zestiria is no exception to that rule. The battle system is pretty solid, it's fast-paced, it feels like an action game, and that's great. I really do enjoy it. One of the new interesting mechanics that they've added into Zestiria is this thing called armatizing. And what armatizing is essentially fusion. The main character in this game, Saray, ends up becoming this thing called the Shepherd, which is essentially the chosen one who is going to bring balance to the world or something generic like that. But being the Shepherd means he has a lot of cool powers. And his friends, such as Mikleo, Lila, Edna, and Dezel, are these things called seraphs. Now, seraphs cannot be seen by regular human beings. These can only be seen by people who are, I guess, aware of their existence, or woke, as people nowadays like to say. Each and every one of Saray's companions, the seraphs, are corresponding elements. So his childhood friend Mikleo, for example, is the element of water. So a lot of his attacks are water-based, and as you can imagine, when he fuses with Saray, they become basically the god of water, and they can pull off some pretty crazy combos, especially considering they have like this water bow, and it's just, oh my god, it's awesome. It's definitely something you have to see. Same thing with Lila, you become the Lord of Fire. With Edna, Lord of Earth. With Dezel, Lord of Wind. And all these forms are really great. They all play differently, so you can't just do the same thing. The water-based attack is more about doing as much damage as possible with multiple attacks from a distance. The earth is all up in your face with you doing crazy blows, only a couple combos here and there, but they do massive damage, and so on and so forth. I loved using all of these forms, and they provided different play styles. Going into this, I was thinking that these forms would be completely overpowered, considering, when you're fusing with characters, more often than not, it tends to break the game. But it's actually not like that. The forms don't work on every single adversary you're going to encounter. And in some cases, armatizing is the worst thing you can do in certain situations, because what it does is limits your amount of characters that you're able to fight with. So you have a standard party of 4 people, right? If Saray decides to fuse with Mikleo, that means you're down to 3 characters. Sure, you have a really powerful one, but then you have 2 other people. So you have to time it pretty dang well, and you have to look at your surroundings and see who you're fighting to see what works best. Just because you become the Lord of Fire doesn't mean it's going to be useful on everybody. In some cases, you could do little to no damage that armatizing was a mistake in the first place. So I'm very glad to see that. Others will argue that it does become overpowered and you end up having to armatize in every single battle. I'm not at that point, but I like armatizing for the simple fact that the attacks are freaking sweet. Now, moving into something that is kind of a concern when it comes to armatizing. While it's all well and good, one of my biggest concerns with that is actually not to do with Saray. Because if it was just Saray who was able to armatize, it wouldn't be an issue. But another character in your party can armatize, and that character is Rose. Rose is my favorite character to play as in the game. I love her playstyle. She's great. And like Saray, she is able to use the same powers, and the same powers being armatization. So she can fuse with Lila, Mikleo, Edna, etc., etc., etc. And they basically create the same form. Now, while it's well and good that you can have 2 different characters do 2 different things, my main problem is that it kind of limits the amount of fighters that you have. So like I said before, when you have the 4 characters, one of them becomes armatized, you're down to 3. So when you have 4 characters, 2 are able to use this armatizing power, you're down to only 2. And to be honest, there really ain't much sense with 2 people being armatized. I mean, sure, it works here and there, but it's better to have one person armatized and you have other people who are able to either buff you up, debuff the enemy, heal you, make sure you're fine. It makes a lot more sense in that perspective. So that's why it was kind of depressing, considering Rose is locked into your party. She cannot be moved out for another character. So if you want to have Saray and 3 Seraphs, or you want to have Rose and 3 Seraphs, you cannot do that. It's got to be them. And that's what I kind of found depressing, considering that you're already limited by the fact that you're a fused character when you go into the Lord form. That was something I kind of had an issue with, but I guess in that case it could be kind of personal preference. Now, the best part about Tales of Zestiria, and what I love about the game more than anything, what is the shining achievement in the title, is something that the second they announced it, I knew I was going to love it. And that is seamless battle transitions. Oh my god. Like, you guys know I play a lot of RPGs, a lot of Japanese RPGs. And one of my, I wouldn't say biggest concerns, but one of my concerns is how much gets lost in between things. Going from one area to another, there's a loading screen. Going from one battle into the field and back, there are multiple loading screens. And that's what was always depressing. Now, I know it's not as bad as people make it out to seem. In most cases, it's a 5 to 10 second delay when you count up everything. But when you're playing a video game, you want things to be fast, responsive, quick, and intuitive, especially considering some of the stuff over here in the West, such as Witcher 3, I believe, doesn't even have loading times. So it was all on Japan. They kept kind of falling out and not being able to adapt. Until now with Tales of Zestiria, I think this is the first game in the series that actually utilizes seamless transitions, and they work beautifully. Like, ladies and gentlemen, when I say you run into an enemy, the battle starts right there. Right there. It doesn't have that weird thing that you would see where they have to craft the environment and then they have to craft a battle specific environment. You guys know what I'm talking about. No. If you are walking down a corridor and you're at like the second door before you get to this certain place, the battle starts right there at that second door before you get to the place. And it works beautifully. The amount of time that you wait is minuscule. It's like maybe 1 second, 2 max. And I love the game for that. However, I don't know if the next problem is actually due to the fact that we have this seamless transition. And that is the camera. Oh my god. Okay, so if anybody who has ever played Tales of Zestiria looked up any gameplay for this, or looked up any impressions, people would have been talking about the camera. And that is not a lie. The camera in this game is atrocious. Now, don't get me wrong. There are workarounds to the camera. But more often than not, you're finding yourself in awkward positions with a camera that you cannot even control. That is the worst part about this. Because it would be one thing if it was just a massive battlefield and, you know, the camera is auto-controlled. Sure. But it's the fact that there are so many closed off environments and areas where you're going through a mansion, where you're going through a cave or a corridor, and this camera will just get you so jumbled back up in a corner, it's not even funny. There have been times where I've almost died because I can't control the camera. I can't see what I'm doing. If I don't spam my way out of it or try to dodge certain things, I don't know what's happening. And that's depressing because this happens all the freaking time. When you get into like the bigger environments and atmospheres, it doesn't become a major issue, which is great. But when you're in those smaller environments and just in general, when you have a bunch of enemies, it's just the camera doesn't know what it wants to do. It stays fixed. It starts going all around. And I'm just like, bro, hold on, man. Let me control this dang camera. And it is as bad as people are saying. This camera is... Oh man, I don't know, like I said, if this is a fault of the seamless battle transitions and you being able to play anywhere in the world, but this thing does get rather annoying at times. Of course, since you're playing any game for more than 10 plus hours, you are going to get used to certain things and it does become less of a hindrance later on. But the fact that we have to deal with a camera that's broken is just like, really? Come on, man, it's 2015 when this thing came out. The final issue that I want to address when it comes to this game is not really a major one per se, but it's something that I did find annoying, and that is the world of Zestiria. One thing that I think a lot of people complained about when it came to the Zestiria titles is that they felt too linear. And by linear, I mean you're literally going from one end of the map to another. There's no divulging paths. There's very little stuff for you to do. And that was something that pissed a lot of people off because it's like, hey, I feel like I'm playing Final Fantasy 13 Tales Edition. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's one thing they tried to rectify with Zestiria. They gave you a huge map with divulging paths for you to go anywhere. And like, believe me, these maps are huge for a Tales game. And they're great. I love going all around the world and seeing things. But one thing I think it suffers for more than anything is that, sure, it's nice to see things, but what else is there for you to do in this world? I mean, go get a treasure chest? Cool, but it's a treasure chest. Come on now. The world being big for the sake of being big was kind of depressing for me. It wouldn't be a big deal if you could just do the normal thing and fast travel, but fast travel in this game is so whack. It's so out of place. Now, with past games or just any RPG in general, once you unlock fast travel, you can use it to go to previous locations you've been. Simple, right? You can do that in this game. Cool. But it's tied to save points. And I don't know if later on in the game you're able to fast travel willingly without the save point, but you have to do through these save points and it costs money. Not a big deal because you get a ton of money. What I have an issue with is that the fast travel is blocked off. Basically, it's blocked off by parts of the story. You're going to be doing a lot of backtracking in this game, going to different areas and experiencing different parts of the story, which is all well and good. Sure, I love when things do that. It's like, hey, you know, we didn't just abandon this area we put for 30 minutes. My main issue is that since it's blocked off, you have to go all the way around through different towns and different areas just to access that part. And it's just a lot of unnecessary running through the fields and fighting enemies. And I'm just like, what are we gaining out of this? Is there any monetary gain that we're getting from this? No, there isn't. So why in the world would you limit it and restrict it by the story? Like I said, that was a minor gripe for me. I know it's not a big deal to a lot of people since collectively when this shit happens, it's only like a couple of minutes delay. But it's still an issue for me. And now we're going to move on to the final thing I want to talk about with this game, and that is the music. The music in Tales of Zestiria, I want y'all, if you are just interested in this game whatsoever, go on YouTube, type in Tales of Zestiria OST. This is a collaboration from Go Shina and Motoi Sakuraba. And when I mean this is a collaboration between two legendary composers, oh my god, it is present in this game. Just the basic stuff, the world music, fighting enemies, going through the trials. It is just beautiful. It's beautiful to listen to. It is just fantastic. And I know I'm not really a person who geeks out too much about music, but it is so worth it. You definitely feel like you are in these battles. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was my long overdue rambling session on Tales of Zestiria. This was a really interesting game to play, and to some it's probably going to come off as the most polarizing Tales game in the series since the sequel to Symphonia. And there are a lot of reasons why I like Zestiria. First and foremost, the seamless battle transitions, like I mentioned, are great. The voice acting and localization is spot on. The ability to play with the Japanese voice options is a nice added feature. And the music is phenomenal. But other than those things, which really don't play a major part in the game, the other things just bog it down to a below average Tales title. I mean, the characters are pretty forgettable. The story is not that engaging, especially considering you're playing this for multiple hours. And all of the little things here and there just kind of detract from the overall experience, and it stops me from really just caring about this game. I'm a person who plays a lot of video games, and I'm able to forgive certain things in the game if I see that other parts of it are making up for it. But when you have a major thing like the camera being god awful and just things being kind of boring, that plays a major role in how I'm going to recommend this game to people. But if you are an individual who is somewhat convinced by what I was saying on Tales of Zestiria, I recommend picking this game up on PlayStation 4 or PC. I'm straying away from the PlayStation 3 because when this game launched in Japan, there were many complications due to the frame rate. It was damn near unplayable in some cases, users reporting drops of under 20 frames, which is just unacceptable for a video game. But on the PlayStation 4, it's more consistent, it's smoother at 30 frames. Granted, no 60, which is unfortunate. I think they definitely could have done 60 for this. It's not that demanding of a game. But I'm not a video game developer. I don't know what Bandai Namco or tri-Crescendo were doing when they were porting this game to PS4. But since it's available on the platform, if you have both systems, get the PS4 version because it's going to look marginally better. And you're able to do things on the PS4 you can't do on PS3, like stream. Wait, no, you can't for this game because in typical Bandai Namco fashion, they blocked off streaming, video recording, and screenshots for this game. Why? The world may never know. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. Post your comments down below on what you thought about this game. And also tell me if you like the format of this video. Do you like me spending time in front of the mic, giving my raw thoughts on the game? Or do you prefer something more short, concise, and to the point? Let me know down below. I'm a GS signing out, and like always, I will catch you guys later. Peace.